Hi card making friends, it's Sandy here and welcome back to my channel. Last week I shared this card and I got lots of comments on how I made the background. So I'm going to create an easier version and I'm going to be using some Simon Says Stamps products. I will link them below and we'll also chat about them while we work our way through the card. And I'm going to start with a embossed panel, and this is watercolor paper, and I'll explain why in a minute. I'm spritzing both sides of it and I'm going to be placing it inside the Heart Wreath embossing folder. This is new for the January release and it's a beauty. Okay, and you want to center it as much as possible. I'm placing it inside my die cutting machine and I'm going to run it through twice. That way I can get as deep an embossed image as possible, and that's very important for the technique we're going to be using today. Okay, so you just want to take it out and we're going to keep it wet. I'm just showing you how nice this embossing is. We're going to be spritzing with some Distress Oxides and also with the Fossilized Amber Distressed Spritz. I'm working on top of my glass mat and I've also got some paper towel underneath to help absorb some of the excess. We're going to be spritzing in small spots. So starting with Wilted Violet, whoops, don't squeeze quite as hard as I just did there. Okay, I'm adding, and you'll notice that it's not spreading. That's because the paper's not wet enough. You want to make sure the paper is wet. That's really part of the technique, is getting these colors to blend together. So I have added a little bit of crushed flamingo, and now I'm filling in the background with the bundled sage. And the nice part about Distressed Oxide inks is they're kind of opaque. So if you make a big mistake like I did with that purple, you can spritz over top of it with the green and it will kind of take over. And in this case, I want some of this to run as well. And so as I'm spritzing it and adding more water, I'm filling in the gaps with my colors. And yes, they're dark. They will soften up as this dries. And I'm tearing off a piece of the paper towel and going along the edges. You want to get rid of these puddles. And I know this looks like a hot mess, just bear with me. It is absolutely stunning once it's finished. Okay, so there's a couple more places I want to add some color and a little bit of water, a little bit more green at the top to tone down some of that purple. And now I'm going to start heat setting it and adding color as I see. As it starts to dry, if it gets a little bit too light, you have the opportunity to add more color, as I did with the pink. And because we've got puddles here and there and we're working with wet paper, you can also move some of these streaks around with your heat tool. Okay, and you see how it's lightening up as it's drying? See how soft and muddled it is once it's dry? This is just the first layer. We've got lots more to do. Okay, so next I'm going to spritz it with the Fossilized Amber Distress Spritz. This looks a lot like gold, and because it is moist, obviously it's activating the pigments underneath and it gives it a pretty mottled effect. And you want to dry this as well. And here I'm trying to show you the mottled, but it doesn't really show up all that well. In real life, it's absolutely beautiful. Okay, next step, we're going to add some heat embossing, and we're going to be using this lovely large Words of Love stamp from Simon Says Stamps. This thing's huge, and it's in the shape of a heart, and then all the letters inside make up the heart. Okay, so I'm using my anti-static tool, and I'm going to start at the top. I have inked the stamp up with Versamark. And so I'm doing the first stamp, and then I'm going to pop it into my gold embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set it. And I'm going to work my way around this card. We're going to do this on the outside, and then we're going to do the heat embossing on the raised embossed heart. And that's why we needed the embossing as deep as we could get it. Okay, so I'm going to do the bottom right-hand corner next. Again, inked up again in the Versamark, stamped the image, covered it with gold embossing powder, shake off the excess, and then heat set it. So this gives a nice kind of mixed media vibe to this. It also, I like to call it background noise. You get a little fun stuff going on in the background. Make sure that you use your anti-static tool as much as possible because you want to get rid of all your sticky fingers, and if your paper is still wet at any part, it's going to activate the embossing powder and it's going to stick. And sometimes you don't notice it until you've heat set it, and then you have this lovely thumbprint in the middle of your artwork. Happens to me a lot because I have warm hands. Okay, the one on the left hand side, I made it lower than the one on the right just so that it didn't look exactly the same. Okay, so here's the backgrounds. And now we're going to do the same thing with the heart. I'm going to get rid of the stamped image heart, and we're going to work with our embossed piece. So again, anti-static tool. This is also from Simon Says Stamps, and I like it because it's a cute little guy. It's really easy to take with you if you're going over to a friend's place to make cards. It doesn't take up a lot of room. Okay, so I am gently pulling the Versamark ink pad across the raised parts of the heart. I'm using a dry brush here to get rid of a few little pieces that are where I don't want them. And I'm doing this in a small section because that way I know I haven't touched it. I'm not going to get my fingers all over it. And by this point, it's fairly dry. I'm going to go down the right hand side, and again the same thing. Gently pull that ink pad back and forth just to get the raised parts of the heart. Cover it with the gold embossing powder. And this is Simon Says Stamps Detailed Gold Embossing Powder. It's really good for this technique. And I like having it in a little bit bigger bin because I get less of it all over my table. I tried the little guys. It doesn't work for me. Plus, I like being able to dip my whole piece in there. Okay, this corner didn't quite get it, so we're going to give it another go. And you may transfer a little bit of the Distress Oxide inks onto your Versamark ink pad. That's not a big deal. You can wipe it off with a baby wipe and then just re-ink your Versamark. I actually have 3 or 4 Versamarks that I normally use one of the dirty ones for this technique. I forgot to grab it. This is my brand new one, and it does get a little purple by the end of this. And I'm just using the tip. So I've got it tilted a slightly tiny little bit, and I'm using that top left corner tip just to ink up the heart, or hopefully just to ink it up. But that's what the brush is for. So you get a few spots. There might be a couple of spots on my paper that's not quite dry yet too, and it's picking up the embossing powder. So good to get rid of those. And this really makes the heart pop. It adds a whole bunch of glam with all that glittery gold as well. Okay, this spot needs a little bit more love, so I'm coming back in. And it is a lot easier to do this in small sections than it is to do in big. I find that you get way too much ink, and you don't really pay attention to where all the embossing powder is when you're working in big sections. Okay, so just getting rid of some excess there, and we're going to heat set this little guy, and we've gone all the way around. This is so pretty. Look at this. Oh, gorgeous. Next up, we need to make a sentiment for our card, and I'm going to use this Galentine. I'm dry fitting my layers that I'm going to be using. I've got some Mirror Gold cardstock that I'm using as a matte, and then we've got lavender as the card base. So I'm going to repeat the gold with part of the sentiment, the inside part. That's going on the gold foil, and then my, shadow in the background is going to be vellum. I love vellum as a background. So I'm running these through. I'm die cutting both of them. We're just going to set those pieces aside. And then to raise it a little bit in the background, because adhesive shows through vellum, here's a little trick for you. I have this leftover scrap of watercolor paper, and it's nice and thick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut another one of the inside sentiments, the Galentine, the words, so that I can glue it behind the vellum. And that's going to raise it up a little bit just to give us a little bit of depth when we go to put the sentiment onto the card. So here's my scrap of watercolor paper. I'm just going to tape it down. And you may have to run this through your die cutting machine a couple of times. Remember that watercolor paper is like twice as thick as your cardstock, so it takes a little bit more to cut it. And so I like to check it before I take the tape off and just run it through again a couple times. Make sure you got good cut, and then remove that. And we have all the pieces that we need. We are ready to put our sentiment together. Okay, so I got my vellum piece, I've got my gold, and I've got my watercolor pieces. So we are making sure that we have all the little its and bits popped out. I'm using the craft glue from Simon Says Stamps. It comes in 2 sizes. I like to use the little one. I'm older and I have a little bit of arthritis in my hands, and I just find it easier to squeeze these little bottles. Okay, so you want to put adhesive on the back of your gold piece, and then I'm going to use my finger just to flatten it out to stop the oozing out the edges that you get sometimes when you put too much glue on. Positioning this on here. The one thing that is really nice about the Simon Says Stamps craft glue is it dries with a matte finish. So if you do have some that squeezes out from underneath, you don't get that shiny look, you get a nice dull, so you don't really even notice that there's a little bit of glue showing. Okay, so now I flipped it over and we're going to be adding the watercolor paper pieces to the back. And so remember, you want to put the glue on the front of the die cuts because you're tipping it upside down to put it behind the gold, and you're doing this on the back of the vellum. Okay, so again, we've got the front side, we're adding glue, and you don't need to add a whole bunch, just a few dots here and there. I also use the tip of this little bottle to move the glue around, as well as my finger. Okay, and you want to try and line that up as close as possible. And you do have a couple of seconds that you can negotiate and move this around a little bit. But this glue does dry quite quickly, and especially on vellum for some reason. So I'm just checking the front, and I can see the A a little bit, so I'm moving that down. And then there's a little bit on the E, so I'm going to move that down a hair as well. There. And we are ready to put our card together. We have all our pieces. So I'm trying to flatten this as much as possible. I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of this. I like using foam tape. It adds a little bit of dimension to the cards. And this foam tape, this is a roll from Simon Says Stamps. It's a big mama set. It was like 4 times this size when I started. I've had this for like 3 years. The stuff lasts forever because it's such a huge, huge, huge roll. Okay, and I'm just working my way across, adding it. Okay, then we're going to I got to straighten that one out. Then I like to use the ends of my tweezers. I'm showing you, this is how big it used to be. Okay, we want to get rid of that release paper. And we're going to stick this down to the gold mat, and the gold mat is 4 by 5 1/4. Again, the watercolor piece was 3 7/8 by 5 1/8. Okay, and then I'm going to grab my tear tape, and we are going to attach this. Oh God, isn't that gold pretty? So tear tape, stronger than roller adhesive. And because we've had watercolor paper, we've got it wet a couple of times, we've spritzed it, it's a little bit lumpy, and you want a nice professional looking finish. So make sure that you use a good quality adhesive so that everything stays nice and flat and actually stays attached to your cards. I have found that, you know, some of this stuff is less expensive, but you go to get the card a month later to send it to somebody and it's come apart. So just something to think about when you're purchasing your adhesive. And again, getting rid of the release paper, and make sure that your card is opening the right way, and you're going to attach this. And this is a A2 size, 4 1/4 by 11, scored and folded at 5 1/2 at the top. I like to turn my papers over when I'm just pushing down on them to make sure everything is stuck, just in case my fingers are dirty. Isn't this pretty? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful soft colors. Love this. Okay, so it's time to add our sentiment, and again, we're coming in with the craft glue, and we're just adding little dots on the back where the watercolor paper is. You don't want any of it attached to the vellum shadow because it will show, and I do have a little dot there that is. Okay, and then I like to use my tweezers just to hold it in the air until I get the placement that I want. Love it. Okay, so I like to add a second sentiment, and I like it to do it in a different color. And these Reverse Love Easy strips from Simon Says Stamps are really cool for doing that kind of thing. I've already put this one through my cutter, and I cut it in strips. Excuse me. And then you just cut off the ends. And then to have a nice finished look, I take a black marker, and this is my Tombow black marker, and I just go around and I black the edges out so that you can't see those white printed edges of the paper. Okay, and then I'm going to take a couple of squares, and these are the Simon Says Stamps square adhesive, the foam squares, cut little strips, and they fit perfectly on the back of these little tiny sentiment strips. And then again, get rid of the reverse paper. And I'm going to attach this underneath the pretty Galentine on the bottom right-hand side. Hopefully straight. I'm terrible at putting sentiments on straight. And of course, I dropped this one. Yay. All right. So for my final embellishment, I am going to use the gold Positively Dazzling Gems. And I'm going to use the wax tip on my Place and Score embellishment wand to pop these down. So love these gems. Love the beautiful little glass jar that they come in. And I got my little, excuse me, gem holder. And I am going to dry fit some of these gems, just see where I want to put them. I kind of like using odd numbers, and I also like to use different size shapes. So I'm putting the medium-sized ones closest to the sentiment and then working my way out with the smaller ones. And I think I end up using 7 if I counted them right. So I kind of dry fit where I want them to go. And then I'm just going to pop these little guys back into my little adorable little jar with a little footprint on top. And again, I'm going to use my craft glue, and we are going to glue these little guys down. And see how easy it is to pick them up with this wand? Love this thing. I think there's like 7 of them in my studio. They're at all of my workstations. So of course you can change up the sentiment on this. You could make this into a beautiful wedding card, or an anniversary card, or a birthday card to someone special. I just love the way this turned out. It was a little surprise when I first started spritzing the background, but I sure was happy with the outcome. So I have another similar card to share with you. I tried making one that does not have the gold matte, and the panel is 4 by 5 1/4. And while it's pretty, I really think that the gold matte really makes this stand out. So there's a couple of versions for you with or without the gold matte. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Everything that I have used is listed underneath. There's also a link over to my blog. And if you did enjoy my video, please consider giving me a thumbs up and sharing it with your friends. It really does help my channel. So until next time, toodles.